Follow the conversation. This is Afternoon on the Dove.
Good afternoon. Welcome to Afternoons on the Dove. I'm your host, Perry Atkinson, and today I'm really delighted. I've been looking forward to this interview for quite some time here on the afternoon show because we had our special guest, Bill Perkins, with us on the radio several weeks ago. He's authored a book that really is a fascinating book, and many of you, when you heard him on radio, responded. He's authored a book entitled The Jesus Experiment, What Happens When You Follow in His Footsteps. Now, as you're looking on the Dove TV at the moment, you're seeing a picture of the book. Look carefully at that cover. Just look at it and study it for a moment. And it took me a while to get it. And what you are seeing there is a footprint of Jesus walking on the water. It's a fascinating picture, and he sent me the PDF file of that. I'm going to print it out and put it in my office because I think it's a subtle reminder that there are moments we get out of the boat and we walk on the water. He's really a fascinating gentleman. We've had him before. He has served as senior pastor for over 24 years, founder and the CEO of A Million Mighty Men. He's a graduate from the University of Texas and Dallas Theological Seminary. Perhaps you have seen him on some of the other large television shows or heard him on radio, and he's a speaker. He speaks to corporations and Christian groups. He's authored and co-authored several books, including When Good Men Are Tempted, 6 Battles Every Man Must Win, 6 Battles Every Man Must Break, and When Good Men Get Angry. And then, of course, the book that we are going to talk to him about today is The Jesus Experiment. By the way, he's a fellow Oregonian. He's up there in West Linn, Oregon, in the northern part of the state. Bill, what a joy to have you with us today on the program.
Thanks, Perry. It's great to be with you.
Yeah, this is exciting, and I'm just curious. Before I get into this book, I didn't read the book "Good Men Get Angry." Is it okay to get upset once in a while?
Oh yeah. Well, Jesus got angry. What we want to do is learn to process and express our anger as He did. And so when we're able to do that, yeah, I mean, it's fine. It's when we don't control it, when we express it in destructive ways, that anger becomes quite a problem.
All right, I may get you back on that. Well, I want to deal with the Jesus Experiment. We had, like I said earlier, we had quite a response when you were on the program. And just what is the Jesus Experiment? Because I know you not only put it in a book, but it's also a 12-week journey that people can take.
Well, the Jesus Experiment is an experiment. And the purpose of the experiment is to test the promise of Jesus in John 10:10, where He says, I came that they might have life and have it abundantly. And so the purpose of the Jesus Experiment is to test the validity of that promise. And the way we do it is we follow Christ into different situations. For instance, we follow Him into Gethsemane, where He faced His fears. And we ask the questions, what would Jesus feel, think, say, and do? And then during the following week, at the end of each chapter, there's kind of some questions, a chart to fill out. All of these are intended to help the reader put it into practice, to live the experiment. And so during the week, the reader asks the question, when I'm fearful, what do I feel, think, say, and do? And then they pray that God would bring their life into alignment with Christ. And the idea is, after facing our fear for 1 week, like Jesus did, we will be able to determine whether following Him or not makes our life more abundant in the face of fear. Doesn't mean the problems go away, doesn't even mean the fear necessarily goes away, but what it does mean is we follow in His footsteps. And I think that after 1 week of following Him in that way, what I've discovered is that it does in fact make my life more fulfilling. And then we follow Jesus into these different situations and we live the experiment in the same sort of a way. The idea being that I experience this real-time connection with Christ during the week. And by following Him in His footsteps this way, I will discover if He gives abundant life or not. And that's really what the Jesus Experiment is about.
What happened in your life that brought you to the point you had to test this?
Well, the book actually was a result of I'd actually helped write the notes for the Leadership Bible for Zondervan. And then when I finished that, I had so many notes on Jesus that I asked if I could write a book on the leadership style of Jesus, and they let me. The name of that book is Awaken the Leader Within, based on the leadership style of Jesus. And then when I finished that, I sensed that something was missing, but I wasn't sure what it was. And as I thought about it, as I prayed about it, as I looked at the scriptures in my notes, I realized that I want to be like Christ, but how? I mean, the goal of Christian spirituality is for us to be like Jesus. And I thought, well, I want to feel and speak I want to feel, think, speak, and act like Jesus. And so then I asked myself the question, well, how do I go about doing that? And I began to study the stories about Jesus from the Gospels, looking for what did he feel, think, say, and do, and then putting it into practice. And so I actually taught it a number of years ago. And then a couple, 2 or 3 years ago, when I was ready to do another book, I was going over my notes and I found this. And I realized that, wow, I think this book, more than any other I've written, is my life message. I really believe that it's a story that captures the essence of what I think the Christian life is about, and that is this real-time connection with Christ that transforms us.
And there's no shortcuts there. You got to do the full 12 weeks, right?
Well, yeah, it's kind of like a recipe. If you read a recipe, you'll see how a really good meal could be prepared. But if you actually buy the ingredients, mix them all together, and cook it according to the recipe, then you will be able to experience the taste of this wonderful meal that's in the recipe. Well, the Jesus Experiment is not a book written to be read and put on a shelf. The book is meant to be read and put into practice for 12 weeks. The idea being that it will really facilitate, stimulate a deeper real-time connection with Christ, which will be life-changing. And hopefully at the end of the 12 weeks, the reader will have put it into practice enough that even when they're done with the book, it will have created a way of thinking, a discipline, if you will, that will have a positive influence on them the rest of their lives.
All right, let me say to our listeners and our viewers this afternoon, the book is entitled The Jesus Experiment, and What Happens When You Follow in His Footsteps by Bill Perkins. It's put out by Tyndale, so let me encourage you to check it out at Evangel Family Bookstores or go online, check it out, get a copy of it. And something you may want to do as a group with your church, the men in your church, yourself, individual, whatever. It's really a great resource. And let me encourage you, if you have any questions for Bill, you can join us today. And the phone number to do that is 776-5368. Again, 776-5368. Bill, I want to come back to one of the main topics in your book and something I think that few of us ever realized. And I really didn't understand this until I had you on the first time when we talked to you several weeks ago. And that is the emotion of fear that Jesus even experienced. I think we read those verses and we just kind of pass over, and we didn't expect Jesus to be afraid of anything.
Right.
And so how did you begin to wrap your head around that and begin to write on that emotion?
Well, when Jesus went into Gethsemane, of course, he took the three disciples, Peter, James, and John, with him, and they waited at the gate while he went on inside. One passage says he went a stone's throw away. He was close enough that they could see his shadow and close enough they could hear him. And we know this because in Hebrew it says, in the days of his flesh, when he offered up both prayer and supplication with loud crying and tears to him who was able to save him from death. So the author of Hebrews, while he may not have been Peter, James, or John, he had heard the story about Jesus in Gethsemane. And so the disciples were able to hear him over there crying out to the Father, pleading with him to allow the cup to pass from him. The text says that when he entered the garden, he began to be troubled and distressed. In fact, it says he was grieved to the point of death. Well, one of the words speaking of his emotional state is actually a word that can refer to not just fear, but terror. And so when Jesus entered the Garden of Gethsemane, first he fell to his knees and then he fell to his face. The word Gethsemane spoke of an olive press where olives were placed in a press and the oil would be squeezed down of them. And it's a very fitting image for Jesus, who under the weight of the sins of mankind and his upcoming suffering was pushed down to the ground, and his blood was squeezed down of him as he faced this fear with the Father. And so, yes, Jesus experienced fear, not the kind of fear we experience when someone hides behind a door and yells boo when we walk into a room, or the kind of fear we experience when we see a scary scene in a movie. It's the kind of fear I felt when my son called me and told me he had cancer. It's that kind of a fear. It's a deep, deep-rooted sort of a fear. It maybe is the kind of fear that a criminal would have on death row, knowing the next day he wouldn't simply be executed, but tortured. And so as he faced his fear, he experienced that emotion, and he was thinking, Father, is it possible for this cup to pass from me, for me to die for the sins of the world without this suffering?
Right.
And then he ultimately said, Father, not my will, but your will be done. So, yeah, he faced his fear by embracing it, by making his desire known to the Father that whatever the bad situation was would pass away, and that he would embrace the Father's will and not his own. So your will, not mine, be done is the message that we are to use when we face fear.
Fear doesn't seem to really fit with masculinity today. We men, we may become afraid about something. We certainly don't show it. If anything, we bury it. So what are we guys supposed to learn from this?
Well, I think, of course, we all experience fear. And I believe that what we don't want to be seen is as men who are cowards. And these, of course, people who, in the face of fear, make decisions that are totally self-protective. And that's the natural tendency. I mean, when fear is triggered, our blood pressure goes up, our heart rate increases, adrenaline's dumped into our system, and we're ready to fight or flee. Mm-hmm. Well, sometimes the best thing to do is flee. Sometimes the courageous thing to do is to walk away from a dangerous situation. But what we want, regardless of whether we fight or whether we flee, we want to follow the example of Jesus. And as we follow his example, what we experience is peace in the face of fear. We experience what the sheep experience in the presence of the good shepherd. And in John 10:10, he's describing himself as the good shepherd who protects the sheep. And so when we draw near to him in the face of danger, he gives us confidence and courage and peace. But it requires the discipline of asking those questions. What would Jesus feel, think, say, and do in the face of fear? And then, Father, bring my life into alignment with Jesus.
Now, if I remember right, when we talked earlier, when you were dealing with Jesus's fear and writing about it in the book, you actually had an experience with your wife. Was it during that time when you were writing that, when she...
Right. Well, as I was writing the Jesus Experiment, I was also attempting to live the Jesus Experiment. And as I was writing this chapter, my wife had a bad experience at the dentist's office, which resulted in her getting lockjaw. And she could only open her mouth wide enough to stick her little finger in up to the top of her fingernail. And that's all she could do for like 3 months. Wow. And during that time, she had to chop her food up very finely. She had to eat very soft food. She was basically on a liquid diet. And we had a friend come over who is a surgeon that corrects jaw problems like this. And he said she had a 99% chance she would need to have surgery. And that as a result of the surgery, she would not be able to chew at all for 6 months. She would have to push the food up against the palate of her mouth. And of course, the good news is she'd get a strong tongue. But who wants a strong tongue? So he said after surgery, her muscles in her face would atrophy. Her jaw would never be normal again. And I was fearful for her. Obviously, there were a lot of activities that she would not be able to do because of that injury. A lot of things we would not be able to do. Plus, the effect it would have on her face, on her personality. And so we prayed like crazy. And about 3 months after this injury, she suddenly got better. Her jaw had been dislocated. She wasn't in pain. She just couldn't open it. It went back into socket. Honestly, the doctor, Dr. James Yanni, he said that he's only seen one case like this in his lifetime. And Dr. Yanni's in his 50s, and he's been performing these surgeries for decades. So that doesn't mean that when we're fearful, if we live the Jesus Experiment, whatever we fear will go away. Right. But what happened to us? As we were asking, what do we feel? Well, we feel fear. Well, what are we thinking? We're thinking this is going to be catastrophic for Cindy. What are we saying and doing? And then, well, what would Jesus be saying right now if he was fearful? He would be fearful too. Well, what would he say? He would say, Father, we are afraid that this bad stuff is going to happen. Cindy's going to lose the use of her jaw, and her face is going to collapse. She'll lose her physical attractiveness. She won't be able to dance or do some of the activities that she enjoys because of this injury. And so we said, Father, our desire is that this go away, but we embrace your will. Your will be done, not ours. If your will is that she suffers through this, she has surgery, she goes through recovery, then God, we embrace your will. And really, it gave us a phenomenal amount of peace during those 2 to 3 months before she actually got better. So it's just a powerful way of focusing on Christ. It's a powerful way of looking at him. It's a powerful way and transformational way of following him.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. Bill Perkins is our special guest today. He's author of the book, The Jesus Experiment. By the way, if you'd like to ask Bill any questions about this, it's a 12-week journey, and I encourage you to get a copy of the book, take a look at it. It's put out by Tyndale, and maybe yourself be challenged, maybe this coming year, to go 12 weeks and take the Jesus Experiment for yourself. We'll be right back. If you want to join us, the phone number is 776-5368. We'd love to hear from you.
Follow the conversation. This is Afternoon on the Dove. This is Afternoon on the Dove.
Well, this afternoon, we are really honored to have with us Bill Perkins with his latest book, The Jesus Experiment. And I hope you'll get a copy of this and pray about maybe doing this right at the beginning of the new year. Maybe the Lord will lead you to do it sooner. Who knows? But it's a tremendous resource and a real challenge put out by Tyndale House, and get a copy of it. The book cover is fascinating. It took me a while to figure out what it was. And when I looked at it, I thought, this is really something. And for those of you looking at the Dove TV right now, there's a copy of the book right there. And that is a footprint, Jesus's footprint, walking on the water. Boy, that pretty much says it all. Bill, I'm so fascinated by your book cover.
Actually, I don't know that it's actually a photograph of a footprint Jesus left.
Okay. All right.
But if he left a footprint, that's what it would look like. But yeah, I like to tell people they had to take a lot of shots as I was walking across water to actually get it at that moment before it disappeared. But it wasn't me walking on water.
No.
When they first emailed me that image, Perry, I was very disappointed because I thought, oh no, a footprint, how trite. And then I thought, well, what's it on? Well, it's not on sand, it's the wrong color. It's not on concrete, the wrong color again. And then I realized it was on water. And I went, perfect. I mean, that is the perfect image. I mean, at what time in his life did Jesus show himself to be the miraculous Son of God in power more than then? And at what time did Peter, was his faith more like Jesus than when he stepped out of that boat and walked on the water towards Jesus? And as I looked at that, I thought, man, that's what I want. I want to leave supernatural footprints on water as a result of my faith in Jesus Christ that others can see, and by following Christ and following me as I follow Christ, they too can experience the supernatural life of Jesus. And that's the Jesus experiment. Get out of the boat, walk on the water, follow his steps, see if he doesn't give you more abundant life. And of course he does.
That's wonderful. You're a preacher too, huh?
Well, yeah. I started doing it before I was writing books.
When you were doing your own 12-week journey of what you wrote about, I can't imagine it wasn't without challenges or obstacles. Did you run into any?
Well, it's one of the things. Well, first, the book was extremely difficult to write. What did Jesus feel, think, say, and do? I just couldn't find any other resources that would help me with that. And so, and then also writing each chapter so that they would be creative and not just kind of predictable and repetitive. And while I was reading it, I was putting it into practice myself. And one of the chapters, one of the weeks is he unexpectedly helped people. And that happened to be a week I was going to India to actually raise money for some orphanages over there and to bring them some computer software, Rosetta Stone, so they could learn English. And just, I brought in some other things, but I thought, wow, now this is a perfect chance for me to live the Jesus experiment and unexpectedly help people. There's a lot of people in India that would not expect my help. And so when I got to the orphanages, the staff, I like to cook. They wouldn't let me even in the kitchen. They weren't going to let me cook dinner. I was there. They were there to care for me. I figured, well, maybe I'll see a lion attack a kid or a bear and I can attack them. But nope, there were no wild lions or bears in this town that attacked the kids. And so when my time there was over and I was with the other two members of my team, I was able to get us an exit-aisle flight for a domestic flight from southern India to northern India. And of course, I feel pretty good about that. I like those exit aisles. You can stretch out your legs. And so as the plane was taxiing down the runway, I felt this bumping behind me. And as I leaned back in my seat to see who was back there, thinking it was a kid, it was a giant of a man. I mean, a huge guy. And I then leaned to my left over the aisle to look back at him, and I saw that this elephant-sized man had his knees pushed all the way up to his chest, and he was just trying to get comfortable in that tiny little seat. And all of a sudden, I felt this prodding in my spirit. And I knew it was the Spirit of God urging me to switch seats with this guy, to unexpectedly help him. The problem was I did not want to unexpectedly help him, Perry. I've got bad knees. I wanted to keep my exit aisle seat. But then as the plane got airbound and got closer to that 10,000 foot elevation where you hear the bing and you can stand up in your seat, I knew what I had to do. What would Jesus feel? What would he think, say, and do? I went through that whole exercise as that plane was, rocketing through the sky, reaching elevation. And so when the plane reached elevation, the giant behind me got up to get his computer out of the overhead bin. And when he was up, I switched seats. And so he came over and he looked down at me, as to say, why are you in my seat? And I stood up in front of him, and it was like that Shaq O'Neal, Ben Stein, Verizon commercial. We got a giant and then a little bitty guy next to him. And I said, I think we should switch seats. And he looked at me, kind of nodded his head, and took the big seat in front of me. And all of a sudden, I realized I had lived the Jesus experiment. And when we unexpectedly help people, it really does generate a sense of well-being and happiness. And when we got off the plane, I found out he was like 6'7" and weighed right at 300 pounds. And it wasn't that he was a fat guy. He was just big. And I noticed he was also walking with a limp. So it became obvious he had a worse knee than me. But that's an example of living the Jesus experiment. I mean, hey, there's a lot of things people do that are more sacrificial. But in that moment, I was responding to the Spirit of God that was nudging me to unexpectedly help this guy by giving him my seat, which was far more comfortable for him. And I'm only 5'9". It wasn't like I needed an exit aisle. I just desired an exit aisle. So anyway, that's kind of that story. It was.
Wow, that's a great story, Bill. Let's jump over to one of the chapters that deals with status seekers, and I know that you relate that chapter and that subject to an experience that you had at the White House. But status seekers, what do you mean by a status seeker?
Well, I'm really encouraging churches here in the Portland area to do what I'm calling the Portland experiment, where churches throughout the greater Portland area do the Jesus experiment leading up to Easter, in either 4, 8, or 12-week series in their churches, where the small group series during the week. And of course, people go to jesusexperiment.com and find out all the details and get the resources. But the reason I mention that is because leading up to Easter, 3 of the chapters deal with the night before the crucifixion. The chapter on Gethsemane, then the chapter where he talks about the vine and the branches. He's on his way to Gethsemane. But before that is the upper room where he washes the disciples' feet. And of course, initially, the disciples were arguing with one another as to who would be greatest in the kingdom, and then Jesus entered and showed them what true greatness is. It's not demanding service, it's giving service. And so Jesus, of course, wrapped a towel around his waist and washed the disciples' feet. And here were these status seekers, and what did Jesus do? He served them. And the illustration that I give is that my son Paul was working at the White House, and I'd actually gone to the White House with a friend, and I wanted to be. This was during a different presidency, and I wanted to be in the front row in the press room, and so I actually took cuts in front of the biggest Christian leaders in the country, and I dragged my friend along with me. And that would be an example of status seeking, so to speak, taking cuts in front of someone. But then I tell another story that's even worse than that. And in this story, my son was taking me on a special night tour of the West Wing of the White House. And of course, the White House is basically empty at night. And we walked by the Oval Office, and as I looked in, man, I was just enamored. There's the Oval Office. I'm, one step away from being in the room that is the office of the most powerful man on the planet. And about that time, my son spotted another staff member, and they walked across the street to a different room. Across the hall to a different room. And I looked around. I didn't see any guards. So I just I'd been wanting to do this.
Don't tell me you went over there and put your feet on the desk.
I walked into the Oval Office, and I actually sat down in the president's chair behind the Roosevelt desk, which is the desk that's been used, I don't know, for presidencies back to the turn of the last century, and still no guards. I couldn't believe it. I'm sitting in the president's desk, and there's no one here to stop me. Where's security? And then all of a sudden I thought, well, maybe I should call home, and I thought, no, that would be pushing it. And so I actually leaned back in the desk and put my feet up on the desk.
No.
Closed my eyes, and about that time, I felt the presence of someone in the room. I opened my eyes, and I just saw the Secret Service agent pulling on my leg, just like I'm pulling on your leg right now.
No. No.
Yes, I went on the tour of the Oval Office. I looked into the Oval Office, but no, I did not walk into the Oval Office and sit in the president's desk and chair and put my feet up on his desk. No, I did not do that.
Okay, well, that was a heck of a story.
But I'm sure as people hear that story, because I know when I give it, when I'm speaking and I tell that story, people are just aghast. I mean, their mouths are dropping open. They can't believe anybody would be so audacious and crazy as to do what I'm describing that I'm doing. But then I asked this question: Can you imagine someone being so self-seeking, self-serving, that they would butt into the president's office and sit in his desk or take cuts at the White House? But that compares to what the disciples did, who were when they were fighting for the right hand of Jesus in the upper room at the Last Supper. Think of it. I mean, what kind of a person would do that? The same kind of a person that would cut in line or sneak into the president's office. I mean, the throne room of God is a tad bit, on a higher shelf, we'll say, than the White House. And that's what these guys were doing. And so what the chapter is about is when we're faced with status seekers, what do we feel, think, say, and do? And what would Jesus feel, think, say, and do in our situation? And then, Father, bring my life into alignment with Jesus so that I can respond to those around me that are climbing the ladder of success and sometimes stepping on my hand on their way up. Give me the grace I need to follow his example in that situation. And I like to tell that story.
That's a good one. It's a fascinating one. We're talking to Bill Perkins. He's authored a book called The Jesus Experiment. Let me encourage you to get a copy of this. It's a 12-week journey, and talk to the Lord about whether you should do this for yourself or maybe do it as a group in your church. You can go to thejesusexperiment.com. Is that right?
Wait. No, it's jesusexperiment.com.
Okay.
Experiment.com.
All right, check that out there. It's put out by Tyndale. Check that out at Evangel or online and get a copy of the book and take a look at it. When we come back, I got to take another break here, Bill. When we come back, I want to deal with the topic of so many guys today are under so much pressure. They're realizing, even if they're status seekers, if I can put it that way, once they get there and they've stepped on a lot of people to get to the top, they're really not satisfied. And they're looking for more. Taking this 12-week journey, taking this 12-week challenge, can it give them purpose in life? Can they find themselves, if I can use that term, of what God called them to be and do in life by taking this course? And I'll let you answer that when we come back. We'll be right back with Bill Perkins right after this.
Follow the conversation. This is Afternoon on the Dove. Follow the conversation. This is Afternoon on the Dove.
Hey, we're back, and our special guest via Skype this afternoon from up there in northern Oregon. We have our good buddy Bill Perkins with us today. He's authored the book, The Jesus Experiment, and this is a fascinating book, and it's a 12-week journey. And let me encourage you to prayerfully consider taking the 12-week journey. I'm thinking about it myself, Bill. I've been reading through this, and I think, I need to jump on this one and go for it. And it might be a good thing to start the new year with. Who knows? But let me encourage you to get a copy of it. It's put out by Tyndale. Check it out at Evangel. Or you can go to jesusexperiment.com and get all the resources if you decide to maybe do this as a group study inside your church. The cover is fascinating. Now, it's not the footprint of Jesus himself, but this is what a footprint would look like on water if you were walking on water. It's a fascinating photo. And every time I look into it, my mind just goes deep on this thing. So I'm fascinated with it. All right, as we were going to the break, Bill, we were talking about so many guys are just not satisfied, and they're really on a journey now. What is it that God put them on earth to do? They may get moved all the way up to CEO of the company, whatever. They're just not fulfilled. And taking this course, does it help them come into alignment with what God wants them for their life?
Well, of course, one of the chapters in the book is he stuck to his mission, week 6, and of course, when I open that chapter, what I talk about is, it's really weird. As I was writing that, I was on the internet I clicked on an image of like the Nature Channel or something, and it showed an outdoorsman, and he was teaching people how to light a fire in the wild. And of course, one of the things you need is you need a magnifying glass. And he popped the magnifying glass out and had kind of a bird nest of straw that he had put together, and he used the magnifying glass to ignite the straw. And so I had a magnifying. It was a clear winter day here in Oregon, and I've got about 2-inch magnifying glass, and I took it outside and took some newspaper with me, and I put the newspaper there on the porch and just set it there for a minute or two, and then felt it, and it felt the same. It had hardly even gotten warmer under the heat of the sun. And then I got that magnifying glass, and I held that baby up, and then it focused that sunlight, and literally instantly there was a black spot and smoke curling up from that newspaper. And the steam is the same way. Water that boils, that's great, but if you take the steam it's producing and you actually harness that, it produces tremendous power. Mm-hmm. And focused light is like that too. And our lives, when they're focused, we can accomplish a lot. I mean, a lot. It's amazing. Any of us know that. When we're really giving our attention to something without distractions, we know how much more productive we are. Well, Jesus lived his life with a purpose, with a clear mission. And everything that Jesus did was evaluated on the basis of, does it help me accomplish my mission or not? And of course, the story that I tell there is where Jesus, went into Jericho, and there was a tax collector by the name of Zacchaeus, and he was a short man. And he was a very unpopular man, but he climbed on the branch of a tree that was hanging over the street. And when Jesus saw him, he stopped, he talked with him, he even had a meal at his home. And Zacchaeus came to faith. And it was a life-transforming faith. He talked about what he was going to do, and that was give away a lot of his money and pay back anyone he had cheated. Jesus then said, the Son of Man has come to seek and save what was lost. So that's the whole purpose of his life, is to seek and save what he's lost. Now, he's given us that same mission. But what we must determine is based upon our strengths, our weaknesses, our talents, our passions, what we're good at, where we have relationships. Based on who we are as a unique individual, we have to ask ourselves, in what way can God use me to fulfill his purpose to seek and save that which is lost? And so, the purpose of that chapter is to help me feel, think, speak, and act like Jesus in relationship to my mission, my purpose for living. And so I think it's a powerful, profound chapter. The next chapter is he took action. And that ties in with mission, because took action means he did not procrastinate. He was not lazy. When he felt the Spirit of God prompting him, the Father prompting him, he acted. And that's also what we must do in fulfilling our mission. Not only know it and pursue it, but we also need to, when we feel God prompting us, to act on it.
All right, let me squeeze in a call here real quick here. Maybe we can fit into the discussion. Hi, Dennis. You're on the air with Bill Perkins. Go ahead.
Hi, Bill. Really appreciate what you're saying. This little testimony, I was a little short guy and all that. God used me, went to the Philippines and as a missionary and so forth. But this verse that God gave me was 2 Timothy 1:7. God has not given us a
spirit of timidity.
He has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of sound mind. And it's amazing what God can do as we, go in faith.
Right.
He took me to the Philippines, taught missionary children, then took me to Western Bible College and became the dean of students there, and many years, and then I got dementia. And so my brain's too big for my skull, the doctor says.
That's a wonderful testimony. Thank you, Dennis.
Well, it is a wonderful.
Yeah, thank you.
Go ahead, God, that's not, this life, this abundant life that Jesus gives us. It's not, it's not just for special people. It's for people who follow Jesus Christ. It does not mean we get everything we want. Does not mean we will be wealthy or healthy or any of that. But what it does mean is that when we follow Jesus Christ, as we encounter the hardships and the joys of life, following his example makes life more fulfilling and abundant. And that's what the Jesus experiment is about, is helping people connect with Jesus Christ. And I think your comment about doing it with your, with a wife or with a husband or with, some friends, with a small group in a church. And the reason that's so good is because you have other people that you can interact with about what you're learning. And at JesusExperiment.com, if you go to the resource page, I've got resources there, sermons that pastors can download, PowerPoint that they can download. I've got the discussion questions are out online, so you can actually download them, and resources that churches could use if they want to use it as a series.
All right, let's talk about some people who have taken your course and your challenge here, and what's been some of the results that the feedback you're getting?
Yeah, now the book's only been out a month, so the people that have been doing it have only been doing it, for probably 3 weeks now. But I'm getting some great emails back from people. One email, the guy, he's read all my books. He said, Bill, I've read every book you've read. He said, this book, I've read it once, and now I'm going through it real slowly to live the experiment. He said it is so profound and life-changing. And, the thing about it is, Perry, what's great about this book is it connects people with Christ. That's what makes this book so powerful, is it is written, every word is written to help the reader connect with Jesus Christ. And in any relationship, if we're going to connect, we've got to communicate. We've got to work on it. So effort is involved, but the payoff is significant because it really restores to a dormant Christian the joy of their relationship with Christ. And I think even someone that's not a Christian, if they live the Jesus experiment, they're going to discover something about him more amazing than they had expected.
Would you consider this difficult?
What's that?
The experiment, to take the 12 weeks and do it.
Well, it's kind of like getting in shape, Perry. When a person decides they're going to lose weight and get in shape, it's hard at first because you're not used to disciplining what you eat and you're not used to disciplining yourself in terms of exercise. But once you get over those initial barriers, then it becomes something that's fun. And I'm not sure. I think that overcoming inertia, I talk about that in the introduction. I talk about my fears about even writing this book because laziness or distractions would keep me from giving it a fair shot. And I think there's probably some people out there that are listening or watching this on TV that feel that way. But hey, I would say give it a try. It's only 12 weeks. I mean, most people can do something for 12 weeks. That's not so long. And if you do it with another person, I think you're going to be pretty excited about what God does in your life because, again, the Jesus experiment is for people to help them connect with Christ. And that's what JesusExperiment.com is for, is to really give them resources to enable them to do that.
Yeah, let me encourage you to go to JesusExperiment.com and then get a copy of the book put out by Tyndale. And the Jesus Experiment, what happens when you follow in his footsteps. It's a 12-week journey. And lastly, in closing, you deal with Jesus dealing with difficult people. We all have those in our life.
Right.
And, what's the Jesus way of dealing with people that are just hard to deal with?
Well, there's a lot of people I could have picked. I could have picked Judas. He was difficult, or the Pharisees. But these were guys that are out to kill him. And the difficult people I face are not out to kill me. Oftentimes, they're people that are well-intentioned. They're just difficult people, like Peter. Peter talks more than anyone else except Jesus in the Gospels. He is spoken to more than anyone else except, by Jesus. And he is rebuked more than anyone else by Jesus, at least of the disciples. And so he was a problem person. Well, what did Jesus do? Well, we find that on the Mount of Transfiguration, when Moses and Elijah appeared with Jesus up on this mountain, Peter apparently woke up and saw this and immediately said, "Do you want me to build shelters?" In other words, here Jesus is in his transfigured state where his clothing is brighter than light. Elijah and Moses are there, and the only thing he can think of is, how can I keep them here longer? So Jesus, may I build some little shelters or huts for them? What happens then is this cloud kind of rolls in, and this voice from heaven, clearly the Father, says, "This is my son, listen to him." And sometimes the way we deal with difficult people, Perry, is we get out of the way and let God deal with them. Now, Jesus could have said something to Peter, but he didn't. What did he do? He allowed the Father to deal with Peter. And then the second thing that, when Peter denied knowing Jesus, what did the Lord do? The Lord forgave him, accepted him, and commissioned him, gave him something to do.
Wow.
And what we need to learn to do with the difficult people is oftentimes to turn them over to the Father to care for.
There you go. Well,
We need to forgive them, to embrace them, and to believe in them. That's what Jesus did with the difficult guy in his life.
Bill, we're out of time, but I want to say thank you for your work and your passion for doing this. And, I think I'm going to get you back in about 12 or 13 weeks. How about that?
Yeah, that'd be fun.
Okay.
Yeah, let's maybe find some people that have been through the experiment and get a dialogue going. That'd be fun.
Okay, cool. Hey, thanks, my friend. Keep up the good work, and happy Thanksgiving to you and yours up there.
Thank you, brother. My privilege to be with you and with the viewers and the listeners.
All right, God bless you. And stay tuned. Coming up here is going to be some special programming on the Dove TV and the Dove radios, and you'll want to check that out here coming up in just a few moments. Thanks for being with us. Join us tomorrow. And again, the name of the book is The Jesus Experiment with Bill Perkins. Get a copy of it. It's put out by Tyndale House. There is a picture of it right there. All right, we'll see you tomorrow.